you can see how much profile completion you have. We have things like that. So I put some soft boundaries around it to make sure that the fintechs have certain kind of quality. So when you experiment with that and then go to production, you will not have kind of a surprise. Another thing which comes up really regularly is, what if the fintech goes bankrupt during my experiment?
Yep.
Or I go live with the fintech. But this is kind of the thing, like, we're going to wait 2 years to see if the fintech is financially stable. Is kind of a great way to shoot yourself in the foot, but it is a real, it's a real question. And there is a lot of competition among fintechs offering similar solutions. If you go into and know your customer space, there's a lot of new solutions coming out, but most of them are kind of similar. So if it takes 2 days to integrate KYC company A, it will also take 2 days to integrate KYC company B. So you have kind of a built-in redundancy that you can't do in the traditional sense. If you spend 2 years to select a vendor, and it's, oh my God, now we need to replace it, going to spend another 2 years to replace it, you have a problem. But on this platform, it becomes fluid. So I think those things start to address kind of all these regulatory issues or perceived regulatory issues around how you can move really fast, including fail fast, but succeed after that very well.
So the reason I wanted to go there is we have had this issue with different sandboxes emerging. It's the question around Australia. So what we saw over the first few years was all of a sudden a massive spurt around sandboxes. After the UK's experiment, Hong Kong tried, Singapore tried, Malaysia came out, Philippines had been running the test and learn, as Callum talked about for quite a while. Thailand launched its, Australia launched its, but all of these tended to be focused on different parts of the thing that they were going after. And so the Australian example was particularly problematic for those of us in Asia because they excluded the big end of town. They said it was going to be fintech specific and small end of town. Well, when that model was copied into Indonesia and you've excluded the big end of town, you've excluded where all the opportunity and money really lay. And so these models didn't translate very well. And so there was excitement, there has been excitement around the Athens example because there's a common set of tools people can come and play with. There's an environment in which you can fail fast and learn and experiment and get the costs of participation low, which is good. Yeah? So that development becomes very important. Bran, how are we doing in answering the question of the necessity of the sandbox environment? Because to some degree, the question still works as to why you actually need a sandbox to do what sounds awfully like market experimentation.
Yeah, I think you want to go back to let's say the heart of the whole thing. Okay, why are we doing this?
Yep.
And if it's, and as most people would understand it, we do this to let's say spur innovation and develop new services for the market. And from our angle, it's specifically the market that people are underserved. But so then you would look at, okay, what are the other elements that come into play? And I think Callum mentioned that briefly. So is a way for the regulator to learn and engage with the market. I 100% agree with that. I think, but the question, and coming back to it, is this the most efficient way? Because putting in a sandbox actually puts a lot of constraints on the resources that a central bank has. And most of the central banks that at least in the Pacific, but I know quite a number in Asia as well, they have limited resources. And very often I dare say, they have bigger fish to fry, much bigger fish to fry. And then looking at, okay, if you want to reach that objective, I dare say, and I'm going to point out a paper that I shared with you earlier, that's from Ross Buckley from the University of New South Wales. They did a research in terms of the effectiveness and the efficiency of the sandboxes, and basically, I can even quote it here, they said that innovation hubs actually provide all the benefits that policy discussions on innovations associate with regulatory sandboxes. So, and I think that's it comes to the heart of the question. I think that we need to, and looking at particularly to myself, but also colleagues that work with ADB, IFC, or that typically operate as a development partner in this space, we have a responsibility to actually look at this, and we deploy resources in those markets, and we need to look at how do we do this in the most efficient way. And I dare say that, and the research is pointing out that this is, sandboxes alone is not the silver bullet to the problem, and we need to look at how do we invest in incubators, accelerators. Think of, in many cases in the Pacific, I think we've started a bit with hackathons, boot camps, but it's very, very nascent, very, very nascent. And we need to do much, much more in that respect to actually feed the sandbox. So in some cases, and I think PNG and also Fiji here is in the room, Fiji is also about to launch a sandbox, so they're actually competing who's first in the Pacific. But and I commend them for it. And what I really like about the fact that they're doing this is because it gives a signal to the market that, hey, we're open for business. We are very keen for innovation. Please come to us. And that is really, I think, what I like about the fact that we see our central banks in the region working on this. So, but again, coming back to it, is it the most efficient way? It depends on how you look at it, but speaking for the Pacific, but maybe not necessarily PNG, but it's, we need to do a little bit more than just some guidelines and developing a sandbox alone. I think there is much, much more investment needed in other areas to feed the sandbox that we just developed.
So there are 2 points that I champion from Bram's perspective, if I get them right. One is the idea of a sandbox for the sake of a sandbox always ought to be questioned, which I agree with you. Even as we race to get them out, this has been a glitzy, new, shiny ball to play with. We all agree with that. We've got to be careful around that issue. The other, which I'm far more focused on, and which I love you for bringing into the debate, is people seem to have this idea of as one sandbox is be all sandboxes, and there's a lack of understanding around the sophistication that sandboxes can bring into the marketplace if it's a one-size-fits-all. Build a sandbox and you're on your way. To the point of the paper, which I have a set of problems with. I'm a huge fan of Ross, and Ross's co-author Douglas is in the next room hosting one of the other breakout sessions, so you can go and harass Douglas. I'm a big fan of their work. But when you come at stuff from a legal point of view, the lawyers have been complaining about sandboxes from the get-go, saying if there's a legal gap in the market, fix the law. Don't introduce experimentation. But lawyers are always going to be allergic to experimentation. And this is where I part company with the paper and that alternative approach. And the two other issues I would throw onto the table for people to take into consideration. We're all here talking financial regulatory sandboxes at the moment, which is very limited. Sandboxes will have a lifespan that goes way beyond the financial sector. But what they are doing is bringing the outside, other players, into what's a very siloed sector, the financial sector. And that whole technology piece, where there is a problem getting license or access, we're opening this up. And that's going to happen in healthcare and education and so on. That bit, number one, mixed with the issue of the regulator having the chance to learn as they go over a very fast-moving technology piece. Those two pieces I think we need to take into coordination with the, is this the right for innovation approach that I do hear you questioning, and I think it's worth questioning that consistently. I'm going to pause there because this also raises the issue of, which I see in the questions, of are these just for technologists? Is this about just finding new technology firms? And I want to see what my contestants have to say about that issue or those issues. Are there questions in the audience that you actually want to bring up verbally rather than the app strewn device? Because there's a few more there. Does anyone have questions on the floor right now? I know they're all there, and I'm going to pick and choose. But, no? There's a microphone right behind you, just in case they're recording you for doing verbal manipulation of you later on.
Okay. I'm having second thoughts now. So my question is right over there. I have an idea that sandboxes are more useful whenever there is there is a fintech innovation that crosses geographical and legal jurisdiction or borders, right? So my question is, what are your thoughts about creating a sandbox environment, for example, on a fintech innovation that crosses several countries like Australia, United States, Philippines, etc., and then having the government regulators convene in that kind of an environment so that they could create a common policy or influence the legislation to pass a law that would support that kind of an innovation.
So I hear a few questions being buried in there, which is a little tricky. But I'm going to ask people to give short answers, and I think everyone might have something to say about that, because that is where the market needs to go right now. So I might just work down the table. Carl, do you want to take the first shot at that?
Sure.
Keep the answers brief, because I know there's a few other questions.
In terms of, we have designed our, one of the things you need to know is nearly all sandboxes are not interoperable at the moment. Okay, we have designed ours specifically so that it is not interoperable. We're currently in unofficial discussions with 2 other central banks in Asia Pacific who want to do something with BBNG around signing an MOU around sandboxes to get, and we have always designed our sandbox to get to a stage where if there is a willing partner in another central bank, that if someone goes through our sandbox, you will accept them in your jurisdiction. If you do something with a company ABC, we will accept them into our jurisdiction. So cross-border, we don't care where the innovators come from. Okay? All they're going to do is meet our principles and agree to work by them and agree our criteria for selection.
Brad?
I want to raise the example that Alliance for Financial Inclusion is actually working on together with a number of central banks across the region in Pacific. But they specifically look at that topic where you have portability of a regulatory approval that you get. Let's say you have an approval from the central bank in X country for X amount of time, for this is the scope. You can use the same approval in another country. Now, let's see how far that goes. I mean, we're in early stage of the discussion, but the idea itself, I really like. There's a lot of buts, but what it actually makes it interesting is that because what you basically create with a regional sandbox and multi-jurisdictional, where many of the smaller countries that we are operating in, they're too small to be attractive for fintechs to come. Because you talk about a 300,000, 600,000 people. Why would I start piloting something in Vanuatu while I can do it in Indonesia? But if you pool all these different smaller markets together, then hey, you actually have a larger pool of customers that you can actually pilot with.
Yeah, so I want to echo that. I think APIX is, we're focused on 20 countries across Asia. They're very, very different in terms of trajectory, regulations, cultural differences, etc. But there is an inherent power in that as well. By bringing it all together, you're starting to see patterns. You also can start to say, hey, why in my country I can't do this and elsewhere it's possible. So I think there's going to be kind of a regulatory kind of harmonization happening, not by trying to force it kind of from a top level, but basically, why in my country can't I do this? And I think, payments, etc., are always kind of quoted. But you also have to understand that if it comes to financial inclusion, a lot of the kind of activity is going to be super local. It's not going to be relevant if I can send money to another country. It's really, how can I start my payment infrastructure around my village or my region? So I think there are regulatory kind of big hurdles the moment you send money from country A to country B. But there's a lot of things that are actually not so different, right? So we kind of imagine it is different. And there's an interesting quote that came from the governor of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, Mr. Ravi Menon. When I met him, I asked him, how's your regulatory sandbox doing? I said, Peter, you know what? Most of the applications we get, we reject, and it's not because we don't want to do it. It fits in the current regulations. is that a lot of banks have set up compliance divisions that are basically making it up, basically. And they're creating kind of what I call shooting yourself in the foot kind of attitude of, oh my God, we should not do this. Yesterday I was talking to somebody from a regional bank here, and she talked about the fact that her peer banks were telling her you can't use the cloud in the Philippines. She went to the regulator and he said there is no such thing. So there's a lot of kind of invented regulation that doesn't really exist. So I think the regulatory sandbox should really be used to experiment. Definitely get the lawyers excited. It should be against the law, because otherwise it is not a regulatory new idea. I think there's another important thing, and with APIX and AFIN, some of you may have seen there was an announcement that the BIS is setting up a innovation lab in Singapore, but it actually will run on our platform. And it's going to be interesting because regulators, central banks, etc., are all starting to kind of use all these new technologies, RegTech, etc. They're going to educate themselves. I think that's a major problem. A lot of regulators, I have to sorry to say this, come from older banks with mainframes and manual procedures, and they think that's the way banking is done. Not anymore, right? So we literally, my colleague over there, Tarun, who runs our technology platform, we literally built a bank on top of Apex 2 weeks ago in 2 weeks. Right, so that's really what it is. It's not more core banking, 5 years, millions of dollars problems. So all of this kind of doing it together, bringing it together, is going to accelerate this kind of journey. And I think that's why sandboxes are fantastic. Specifically for smaller countries, smaller banks. Smaller banks can't afford a sandbox. Only the big banks do. It's a couple of $1 million, a couple of years to set. 2.5 years. We spent 2 years setting it up. Sharing the whole thing out, having everybody come and play, I think is the way to go. And then the support structure around it that you talked about is really important. You need to have you need to have incubators, etc. But putting it together, I think, is going to slowly tell regulators to say that why am I doing this, right? And I think there's a lot of people going to say, well, it really doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So I think that is going to be kind of the effect of. We hope that is going to be one of the side effects of AFIN.
We're focusing very heavily on on the regulatory sandbox issues. In the technology world, sandboxes have a long history. You sandbox something to actually test it and see that it's working properly. With a commercial view, you've got something ready, you're making sure it works so you can get it out the door in either beta or because you've actually run the commercial with live data in the thing. That's been going for a very long time. The issue in part that we're also bringing in here is the regulator's ability to get comfortable that this isn't some kind of threat to the marketplace and that they can then fast track that out. But I would link that to what I understand talking to MAS and HKMA and others. One of the ironic successes that I think you're pointing to implicitly with the sandboxes is that it has actually dispelled a lot of fun. That people have thought that that's a path into the market only to find there was no block in the marketplace anyway, and that they're actually able to participate. And I understand Singapore and Hong Kong both think of that as quite a success of their initiatives, that people have therefore been spurred into trying things in the marketplace.
Entirely.
Brad?
I agree. I think one of the key lessons that at least from the experience of what I've seen in Fiji, for example, and also in PNG, is you see that central banks become much more proactive in reaching out to the market. I mean, when is the last time that imagine 10 years ago a central bank governor going to a co-working space and reaching out to tech firms? I couldn't imagine doing that a central bank governor would do that. Well, very soon Lloyd McCartney is doing that, exactly that. And so the sandbox itself is probably not the most efficient way, but in a sense it actually has helped us to nudge the different market stakeholders that usually didn't talk with each other or are sometimes even afraid of knocking on the door with a regulator. The regulator has opened the door and said, hey, we're open for business, please. If you have questions, you want some guidance, very often, and I think Maz is famous for it, but informally, we can nudge you in the right direction. We can give you some hints. Please look at this. Pay some attention here on this. And I think that is really good. That's really good.
Just 1 second. This one, because I don't want to lose one other bit that came up before. With Peter, if I go back to, this is linking to it. If I go back to a comment that you made that I want to come back to on if you don't digitise, you're effectively going to be a dinosaur and run out. I think I heard you sort of alluding to. And with the idea that if incumbents didn't get with the picture, they were going to die as stuff happened. And part of the benefit, therefore, of the sandbox fintech world and environment is that we're seeing that digitisation push through. There's a bit that I just want to challenge in there, because a lot of the big banks are of course digitising and putting a lot of money into doing so, which doesn't seem to automatically address the financial inclusion piece. So you point out we've got a lot of technology and digitisation out there, often 100% coverage and smartphone penetration, but we've still got very low formal financial inclusion across a lot of our markets. The digitisation piece itself hasn't induced the banks to go and address this.
Right. I want to, yeah, it's a very good question. It has a lot of aspects to it, and we only have 7 minutes. But
when you walk through, take me to the answer that says, why aren't the sandboxes addressing this just
well,
yet?
it depends on what you mean by digitalization. If you take a big bank and replaces its mainframe with some new technology and some fintech, etc., doing the same products for the mid and the upper part of the pyramid, so to speak, you're not going to get anywhere to financial inclusion. And I saw a message there, what if you have an old legacy mainframe or whatever? If you go to the second tier and go all the way down the pyramid of banks in the region, you'll find that increasingly the amount of technology available is less. There are a lot of very tiny regional banks that run on Excel or paper, etc. And you say, oh my God, that's so horrible. But that's a huge advantage for those banks to digitize, because they don't have any legacy. They have nothing that stops them from going there. They don't have IT departments that are full of people that, oh my God, over my dead body, are we going to do anything new here? There's a huge opportunity there. And what is happening in the technology world right now is what we call a bank in the box. If you're familiar with mainframes, very big, very expensive, only the big banks of the world can afford. Then we came with the Temenoses and the FlexCubes and the Finicals of the world. They're also very expensive. But now on the cloud, you can have a bank in the box. You can just select the little pieces you need. And within 2 or 3 days, you basically can book a loan at a very, very low cost. We're talking now really about cost that is going to allow these things to be manufactured. And I think in that space, that's where the opportunity is. And I think in our sandbox, we have 3 or 4 providers of those type of technologies already in the sandbox with their APIs. So you can, there's one of them, I think it's called Solaris Bank from Germany, and some are regional ones. But basically, you have all the APIs and you can build it. So I think that is going to make a difference, not necessarily replacing your old stuff with new stuff. Another related question to what, if I have old legacy, what do I do? If you're going to go after the billion people unbanked, and you're a small bank and you have, let's say, 100,000 people on your legacy system, just don't touch it. Leave them there and put a new bank in the box in the cloud next to it and start booking there. You don't have to bring it together. A lot of people keep on thinking, oh my God, I have to replace this thing first, and then this and that. No, you don't have to. There's nobody says, no regulation, no nothing, says that all customers must be in the same database. Actually, I don't think it is from a technology point of view, not very smart anyways. So I think from that point of view, the digitization for financial inclusion really has to come from these type of technologies. But I think the banks that have the right mindset, know what they need to bring into their markets and access this technology, they're going to be like the Teslas. They can move really fast. While you're a top tier bank, it actually is very hard to get rid of all the legacy. And that's why they spend so much money, and they're actually, what's the point, right? So I think the opportunities are, for the second, third tier banks have the opportunity to bring it there. I think the larger banks, their cost structures, I don't think are going to go down by digitization that much.
Yeah, and I think digitization is only one part of it, and I like the point you're making about moving faster. At the risk of totally getting the rest of the room offside and losing my next consulting gigs, one of the issues I like about the P&G focus is that it's actually got a focus on financial inclusion. I have a problem with the sandboxes in that we haven't actually successfully gone after the financial inclusion piece en masse. So I'm chuffed that you've got a couple of emerging examples in your sandbox that are coming through, but we haven't seen that very successfully yet. But part of the answer to why, as banks have digitalized and brought in new technologies and lowered their cost structure, they haven't gone after that piece, is banks hate poor people. I know I'm about to get in trouble, but Piyush Gupta won't get on stage with me anymore because he won't answer that question. But banks don't like what the business model doesn't allow for addressing that poor part of the market. Technology companies, which can come in, which is the other part of the sandbox, they can come in and present a business model that, if attractive enough, can get allowed to see if it works in the marketplace. And I think this is what I've seen in the P&G example, if I got that right, that it is geared towards addressing the financial inclusion piece and looking for people who will come and participate that maybe the banks just don't see is going to work, but at scale for low cost will get financial inclusion. Yes? The one, I know they're saying you've only got a few minutes left, but they told me I've got 3 hours to play with, so I've got a minute more questions. One of the questions that you haven't addressed, that comes up with the cross-jurisdictional piece, which still intrigues me, is the issues around security and data transfer issues. How do we address these in the sandbox space? You've got guys coming in, starting a low-cost, lightweight solution. They're going to prove themselves as being no systemic threat. They're going to show you that they can function in your marketplace. It gets success. They want to port that to another market. How do we do that with all the considerations and concerns around data and security issues now? How should we be looking at those in the sandbox? Do we need to have security requirements for the sandboxes? Please.
Okay, in the BPNG sandbox, we've made it part of the application form where applicants have to tell us what they're going to be doing to ensure data protection and customer protection. They have to be able to show us that if they're going to be using live data with live customers, which is one of the reasons you go into a sandbox, that every single one of those, well, first of all, what is the target customer size? It's probably not the entire bank or of a bank. It'll probably be 100 customers in probably 1 or 2 segments. We want to see from them, every one of those 100 people has given their approval in writing that they understand they're going to be part of an experiment, they are going to have their live data used, and probably, depending on the relationship between the bank and its customers, they may even go so far as to say, we want some kind of indemnity that we'll walk away with at least what we started off with. Okay. On top of all that, then part of our evaluation team is our cybersecurity team, which we are informed by various outside parties is one of the better ones in Asia Pacific. So that gives me a great deal of confidence. So cybersecurity is right up there at the top, which actually is a code word for customer protection, is number 1 in our list. Okay, so we've built that straight into the heart of the whole process. And because we've structured our application process so that you, the applicant, will tell us what we want to know, what your